Welcome everyone, welcome to the start of the weekend. Today we have a video camera inside a kindergarten classroom edition. That's a place fit for all of you. What we have for today is some more news about the beta of Dragonflight, but what is going to take the spotlight for today is going to be what has transpired in the beta of Dragonflight right at the bottom, right down there. It's the release candidate build in the beta of Dragonflight. So TLDR, Blizzard is starting to consider this version of the build a possible release candidate for the expansion. I know it feels like it's still far away and it feels like there is a lot left to balance and a lot left to fix or to polish in the expansion, but we are 24 days away from the expansion. We are literally 3.5 weeks away from the expansion, so it was bound to happen that this release candidate would pop up for us to look at. However, there is something worth pointing out about a release candidate build. This is relevant because, generally speaking, if this one becomes a release candidate and Blizzard pushes through and actually releases the expansion with this build in the beta, it means there are not going to be any more beta builds, which means it's going to be much less likely to see major changes coming in the beta from this point onwards, because this is the release candidate. So it means most of the changes, or rather all of the changes, if this build stays all the way up to the release, are going to come through and via hotfixes. So tiny, small numbers tuning, fixes of bugs, fixes of problems that are in the beta right now, some minor changes here and there. But major changes like talent overhauls, swapping talents around, or changing talents altogether become much less likely now that we have a release candidate build in the beta. That's the point of this piece of news. Basically, the purpose of this piece of news is to forcefully pry your hands away from the tank of copium you were holding on for certain specs and throw it out of the window, because this change makes it much less likely that many of these specs, which have received some complaints, to put it mildly, from the player base, are going to receive the appropriate changes the player base would like to see. This is still not too big of a thing. It's not too big of a desperate situation for specs that are not currently in a bad situation because of their talent tree being broken, ugly, or simply not fun to go through, but they are in a bad situation because of numbers. That is something that can still be fixed in the beta via hotfixes, so without having to push a new beta build. So specs with, for example, low numbers at the moment. So specs like Elemental Shaman, specs like Restoration Shaman, specs like Frost Mage, specs like Destruction Warlock, they can still get away with it by simply having their numbers tuned up a little bit more. Meanwhile, other specs, of course, specs like Guardian Druid is a big one, specs like Shadow Priest is another considerable one, specs that still have received some complaints from the player base because of how they play out and how they work. Those are the type of specs that are a little bit more out of luck with this reveal that now we have a release candidate for the beta. So that is the thing with this discovery about the beta build being a release candidate. What will this mean in these next few 3.5 weeks or so before the release? Which type of changes can we still see in the beta, going into the beta? So that, of course, was the main bigger change, right? The release build. So this one, of course, was the main big point of news for today. There are a couple more tiny, small bits of news worth pointing out, just in case, One is about the catalyst, and of course, here goes everyone. Oh my god, Blizzard has relented. Finally, we are getting back our catalyst active after 1 or 2 weeks into the patch, right? That's the change. That's why you mentioned the catalyst. No, that's not why I mentioned the catalyst, unfortunately. I mentioned the catalyst because the change to the catalyst is that now you're not going to accrue weekly charges or bi-weekly charges of the catalyst. You are going to gain them by completing activities in game. these activities in-game are still going to be account-wide, just the same. So if you're gaining 3 charges, for example, you are gaining 3 charges for each and every single one of your characters. You don't have to split them. You don't have to split them around. So of course we don't know much of anything else other than the data-mined complete group activities to earn charges across all characters, and the fact that the limit is 6 charges. So it caps up to 6. Of course, it feels quite weird nowadays to hop into Shadowlands, go to the Catalyst and look at the warning message when you're trying to transform something, mentioning that you only have 174 charges left. You know, that was obviously going to become quite unnecessary the deeper you go into a patch. 6 charges should be fine. It's not that you're going to be gaining gear to such an extent that you will be wanting to constantly chew through Catalyst changes of gear. What is a little bit more contentious about this is, number one, how grindy is going to be to unlock these charges. Although if you consider that at the start of the Catalyst it took you a week to gain 1 charge, I think they're going to start on the same level. Something around, you know, do 2 or 3 elite world quests, and these are pretty elite in Dragonflight. They're pretty tough. You will need a group, or at the very least 2 to 3 players, to deal with these open world elite hubs where every mob is elite and hits like a truck, or, you know, complete 2 or 3 mythic plus keys or a few raid bosses that will give you enough progression to unlock a charge every week. That's likely what's going to happen. What I'm more concerned about is the catch-up system. One of the things that was quite cool for this system, for the Catalyst system, was the fact that you could level up, or you could decide to bring back one of your characters that you totally chose to be a main at the release of Shadowlands and then dropped after 5 days. You could log in again and suddenly have 50 plus, 60 plus, 80 charges of the Catalyst, because it kept rolling month after month in Season 3 and Season 4. Now this one doesn't, because this one is simply going to be based on the amount of activity you do, and it only caps up to 6. So you can't stockpile the charges. Maybe 1 week you have been stockpiling up to 6 for a while, you are a little bit lucky, you get a couple of pieces of gear on 2 of your characters, you transform them all with your Catalyst, and you are back down to just 2 charges when you suddenly decide to play a 3rd character and you are a bit behind in charges. That's the only thing that is a little bit weird about this cap at 6 charges. I'm sure Blizzard will eventually, you know, ungate the time gate, unclog the frog, and make it faster to gain charges, as well as cap the charges at higher than 6. That's I'm pretty sure of. So I don't think this change, while interesting because it puts you more into the game, it gives you even more incentives to finish doing your daily/weekly chores for the charges of the Catalyst, I don't think in the end will impact too much, assuming Blizzard is not too nasty with the grind required for these charges, which again I don't think they will. So we are finished our kindergarten class, my dear children, with a piece of news about the crafting orders from Dragonflight. So we go back to our upcoming expansion, which has gotten its crafting orders testable a couple of weeks, 10 or so days ago. Blizzard went for an interesting change. The change is that this one right here is what you could choose to put or not put, to provide or not provide with a crafting order. So you are going to a crafter and tell him, hey, I want you to craft me this, but I'm going to give you this one. And the other 2, you provide them yourself. Maybe I'm going to give you these 2, and the last one, you're going to provide it yourself. It was still mandatory for the player to provide with the epic bind-on pickup weekly time-gated stuff. That's still the same. So Primal Chaos and Spark of Ingenuity are still required to be provided by the player, not by the crafter who received the crafting order. But all of the other reagents, all of the other materials, all of the other optional reagents were able to be provided by the crafter who takes on the crafting order. The change now is that Blizzard is making it so that all of the standard base materials, which include all of the epic craftable ones, the epic leathers, the epic cloths, and all of that stuff, all of that will have to be provided by the customer, by you who want to get a piece of gear crafted by someone else. So now this one turns into this one. Now all of that will have to be provided by you. So now what the crafter receiving the crafting order does is only add the final reagents, which can improve the skill level, improve the item level, or improve the quality of the potions or the flasks, and add potentially optional reagents. Optional reagents like missives, choosing the secondary stats on the item, etc, etc. All of the basic reagents plus the bind on pickup / weekly time gated reagents, all of those will have to be provided by the customer now. This was explained by Blizzard as to try to limit the amount of confusion and the amount of mess happening in the crafting order system with dozens and dozens and dozens of different prices for different things because of the tiniest differences. The combination of possibilities of things you could change, either because they were provided by the customer, so already paid for, so the crafter didn't have to account for that price, or because they were provided by the crafter, meaning it costed more. All of these different combinations made it so that for a single item you could find like 60 different options of how much it costed or of how much it took to craft. In order to try to make it less confusing and more streamlined, all of the baseline basic reagents have to be provided by the customer. It's worth mentioning that all of these reagents and materials, the basic ones, are still sellable and purchasable on the auction house. Okay, so all of these can still be traded in any way you want. It doesn't matter if now you have to provide them. It doesn't matter, just go to the auction house and buy them. So that is still there. This change was more likely just to make it a little bit simpler, a little bit less confusing for this new system being added in Dragonflight for the players. That's basically just about it. So for today we are done with this kindergarten lesson. I think it went on for more than enough already. So we are stopping for today. As usual, I am starting by thanking all of my Patreon supporters for their contribution and their support to myself and this channel. You can still, don't worry, since you're all pretty small, it's unlikely you have too much money on you. You can still support in other ways other than spending money by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Lastly, for more parasocial relationships and general interactions, you can follow me on Twitter as well as subscribing to my Patreon, which will give you access to my Discord server as well. With all of this said and done, I'm going to leave you back to the start of your weekend. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, okay, fine, I'm not too against this. I think it's cold enough. When you can start wearing scarves and neck warmers, it's a good state to be in autumn.